I'll start at the beginning. I was born breech. And I've had a difficult time with the world ever since. I just didn't want to come out. The womb is warm and safe, and life isn't. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and at 6, my father became an RLDS church appointee. And so we moved from Detroit to Sandusky, Michigan. We're there for a while, then we moved to Columbus, Ohio, there for a while. Then we moved to Toronto, Ontario, Canada, an experience that I loved. It is a bit like living in another country, another culture, and I just loved it. And then I moved to Council Bluffs, Iowa, before I came to Graceland College. Graceland College, as you know, was a 2-year college for most of its years, but in 1960, which was my graduating class at Graceland, that was the first 4-year accredited bachelor's degree that was given. And it was, I mean, we could only major in religion in those days. My experience at Graceland, well, no, let me start. I'll probably jump all over the place. And Benita told me to be short and not use anything I've written and stuff like that. In terms of the faith journey, it does begin early, as it does for most of us. I was raised grateful to have the parents I had, and to be raised in that home, and to share in a variety of congregations in the Community of Christ Church, because all of that was the foundation for my life. And I couldn't be more grateful. And the rest of my life, I don't want to sound too dramatic here, but the rest of my life was, in a sense, a way, at least I tried, to give back because of the gifts that had been given to me, both by my parents and by the larger church community. And when I was, in terms of the faith journey, with respect to priesthood, I was ordained when I was 16 to be a priest. I was ordained when I was about 23 to an elder, and then I've been a high priest for about almost 30 years. And I don't say that in terms of the offices. I'm just saying that's a part of my life, particularly the experience of being 16 and a crazy adolescent who loved all the crazy things that adolescents love. And yet, at that early age, sensing in the midst of being a goofball, sensing the importance of ministry. And so that call at the age of 16 was extremely important to me. I went to Graceland having begun before Graceland, even before Roy Chevelle and others influenced my life. I went to Graceland with already some reticence about accepting everything that was told to me, particularly about religion or the church. And it wasn't that I was trying to be a smart aleck. It was that I had significant questions even early on, and had some doubts and expressed those doubts over and over again. I'm sure to the chagrin of particularly the church school teachers of mine. An example of my perspective was when I was about 12 years old. One of the apostles came to visit in our home. I don't remember which one it was. Might have been a member of the First Presidency. We would have those kinds of visitations all the time. And my dad, and I think it was a member of the First Presidency. I'm trying to come up with his name. Now you can identify with me, most of you, trying to come up with names. They were talking out on the driveway in front of the house. And I came up to them in the midst of their discussion, and my dad said something to me, and I said, "Oh gosh, Dad, you're nuts." And then I walked away. And remember the First President said, "Do you let your son question you, you know?" And Dad said, "Hey, I know he's beginning to grow up." How wonderful. I went to Graceland, and I tell you, I don't want the whole hour to go by now, but it was the most wonderful experience in my life. I wanted to do everything. I wanted to participate in any way. And so when I was fooling around with some women I loved being with, I found out they were practicing or getting ready to be not interviewed, but be ready to go as cheerleaders, to be accepted as cheerleaders. And I just, as always, just was messing around and ended up being the first, I think, male cheer. No, not the first by any means. Wynn Inslee was a cheerleader. And then I had played tennis maybe 3 or 4 times in my life and really loved it. I wasn't a great athlete at all, but I loved a variety of sports. And so I'm not sure why, but I went out for tennis to see if I could do it. Well, I was number 10, and they accepted 10, but I was always playing a better player. And so I did learn how to play tennis. So I accomplished my mission and had a lot of fun with the guys. I was in choir and loved it. Mabel Hyde was my choir leader. And it was just a wonderful experience. I was with some of you who were at Graceland when I was, and you know what I'm talking about in terms of the beauty and the fun and the enlightenment of that time. I chose to be a religion major because there was nothing else I even considered about the future of my life. I wanted to be a church appointee like my dad. He was a wonderful mentor for me. And I loved the work, the kind of relationships he had with people who he loved, and I wanted the same thing. And so I went to Graceland with that in mind, and it was wonderful when they decided to do the religion major. But at the end of the first 2 years, I had loved Graceland so much. I can't believe it now, but I forced myself to leave Graceland. Partly because I thought I was enjoying it so much that I needed the challenge of going out into the big world and doing education there. And so I left for a semester. And I went to the University of Omaha, University of Omaha, and lived with my parents. I didn't have any money, of course. Lived with my parents and went to the University of Omaha to kind of think through what was next for me. And during that semester, really thought seriously about what was ahead. And I said to myself, this is crazy. Why not go back to be at a place that you love and to major in a discipline that specifically connected to my future goals? And so I did go back. I was one of the lucky persons in the religion program, the religion major, that had not only Roy Cheville, but had Leland Nygaard. Maybe some of you don't even know Leland, but Leland Nygaard was one of the first persons that ever did seminary work in our whole church. And he did it at one of the best seminary union in New York. And then I also had Alma Blair for a course or two. And I had Ray Zimzer, and he wasn't as crazy. He was still crazy then, but not as crazy. And please, I say that, and I'll say that about others too, but it doesn't mean I don't appreciate their contribution. And Lloyd Young, one of the finest men I've ever known, who was a sociologist, not a religion professor, but he taught religion in Graceland as one of the replacements for Roy Cheville. And what I'm trying to say is, it wasn't just Roy Cheville making me into a little Roy Chevillian, as some were at Graceland, unfortunately. It was taking the best, having the opportunity to take what I thought at least was the best from each of those persons, and having a wide array of perspectives rather than one push. It was many, many years later that I realized that Dr. Cheville didn't take us far enough. He would stop at certain points, didn't want any more questions, didn't want the doubts. It took me a lot of years to realize that about him. And I'm glad I didn't find out until later, because I would have pushed more, as I did sometimes in some of my classes. Well, I don't want to go into that.
I want you to go into it a little bit in terms of how your thoughts of God have changed through the years.
Well, let me just finish,
Okay.
if it's all right,
Absolutely.
the story, and then I'll talk about faith journey. I'll talk about theology and the evolution of that, of some of that thought in my own life. But anyway, at 22, I graduated from Graceland, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen immediately, but I went to Independence, Missouri, and worked there for a little while. And now look, I am a religion major, the first, one of the first. Did we have persons with seminary degrees or religion degrees? No. None. And so at 22, someone said, Howard, they're interviewing for a job in the religious education department at World Headquarters. And I thought, oh gosh, I couldn't possibly be involved that way, or they wouldn't accept me. I'm too young. Is it green behind the ears? But I interviewed for the job, and I'll be darned. They gave me the job. And I tell you, I was so utterly happy that if they'd said, we're not going to pay you, but we want you to work hard, I would have said, oh, that's okay, no problem. But seriously, I was thrilled with the opportunity. And part of it was that I worked in the religious education department at the time in the church. That was the most alive, meaningful department, I thought, ever in the church that day and then after it. And so I worked with people like, and some of you will not know some of these people, but some of you will. Someone like Don Lander. And I don't want to repeat myself, but I'm going to say about everyone, or I believe about everyone, that they're the finest person kind of I'd ever met. Don Landon, Dick Lancaster, Jim Lancaster, Cliff Buck, Ethel Packard. I could go on about those kinds of persons that nurtured me every single day, helped me grow up. And yet, they were coming to me for questions about religion and theology. I couldn't believe it. And so we had an opportunity to give and to take. And then further, I was around the apostles and the presidency and other major church leaders all the 4 years that I was there. And an example, I would get on the elevator, and often I'd say, because of course I was intimidated a bit by these grand leaders of the church, I would get on the elevator, I remember more than once, and say, oh, hello, Brother Dewey. Well, it was Cooey. He was one of the presidency at the time. But Cooey, again, who I respected so much, was a member of the presidency. Morris Draper was the other member of the presidency. Cliff Cole was the president of the 12. Persons like that who had great influence on my life. I was there for 4 years. I'll tell you, it was just like Graceland. I loved every single moment. No, not every single moment, but I loved it most of the time. And I had an opportunity not only to write some church school materials. In those days, we wrote quarterlies for our church congregations. And I worked on some editing and changing and adding to some of the quarterly materials, and I've got a story about that, but I don't want to get off too quickly on things like that will take me away. 9:54 already? Holy cow!
We started late.
Well, at the all along, when I was working there and still wanting to be a church appointee, I was paid like a church appointee, except I didn't get a new car and I didn't get nearly the big salary of the appointee. But while I was there, increasingly, I felt called to pursue religion at the graduate level. Bill Russell and I think were the first ones to go to St. Paul's Seminary. No one was going to St. Paul's Seminary in those days because seminaries were not good. We were the teachers of the world. We didn't have to go to seminaries who would only mix you up. And I had many who advised me not to go to the seminary. They said, you're going to be a church appointee, or you want to get a master's degree in business. So Bill and I started at the seminary together, and I started thinking about that, working hard at world headquarters, and then adding to that the load of classwork at a real fine seminary. And I knew it would take me 8-10 years to do it part-time. And so I found out, I did some research, and found out about a program, PhD program in religious studies at the University of Iowa. Very unique program at the time, in a secular university, an actual school of religion. And so I decided to, and you had to have a master's degree or a BD, which was a Bachelor of Divinity in those days. Bachelor of Divinity was still 3 years of graduate work, but they called it a bachelor's degree. And so I thought, well, you could have a master's degree in any discipline? Wow, that might get you in. So I did a master's degree in counseling, part-time, and got that in a couple of years, 2.5 years. And it was, I keep saying I loved all this. I did, I loved it, because once again, thinking about my own ministry through the years, I thought there was nothing better that I could do than do that kind of work. So I did that. I applied to Iowa. I knew that I would be very lucky to get in, because who they were getting were professors in religious studies who didn't have their final graduate degree. That's who was going there, that they were accepting, and pastors, and those kinds of folk. But anyway, I applied there, and I think they had 3 piles. Yes, maybe. I can't imagine, but we could always change, maybe. I said that some of the advice was that I not pursue religion. I was advised of that because of the questioning about the exploration of religion. And I had some concerns about that, but towards the end of my involvement there, I got a call from Clifford Cole, asked me to come down to his office. And I did so, and he said, Howard, I've heard that you're planning to go on for the PhD in religion in Iowa. He said, I just want you to know that I know that this is going to be tremendous, in some ways, tremendous problem and challenge for you, because you will not be supported by many of the good things. But I want you to know that I'm thrilled that you're pursuing this. We need this kind of thing occurring. And boy, did that was that ever important to me. So I went to Iowa. I was there for 5 years. I came in '69 to Graceland to teach religion, and I knew I was following the inheritance, so to speak, of Cheville and others, and I took that very seriously. But you can imagine, well, I haven't said anything about my religious perspectives, my theology. In a word, I was a young liberal. That just doesn't say a lot, but it says, in that day it said a whole bunch. Because we were an extremely conservative church in a variety of ways, both religiously, theologically, socially, in terms of social issues. And I stood out from that. I wasn't trying to stand out. That's who I was. That's where I have been for most of my life. And in fact, towards the end, I think it's a movement from liberal to heretic, to be honest with you. But that's okay. I have loved most of the heretics in the Christian tradition. So the early years at Graceland were a bit rough. And there were, and I'm not going to name names, but there were some members of the board of trustees that did what they could to rid Graceland of me. And thankfully, gratefully, like Rich is here, gratefully I had the support of most of the presidents at Graceland at the time, who understood what was important, understood what I was trying to do in terms of the study of religion. And again, oh my gosh, I loved the opportunity. I couldn't believe I had the opportunity to teach at Graceland. And that came because I had gone to conferences, world conferences, since in the 50s, 58, somewhere around there. And they came, a couple of administrators came from Graceland to talk to me when I was working on the PhD to see if I would come as a faculty member. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, if you'd asked Val Marouche, or said to her, Howard Booth is going to come and be a professor here on the faculty at Graceland, she would have said, what? he was just an average student. Maybe just a little tiny better because he worked hard at it. And that's true. I'm not downplaying myself. I mean, I can't believe it was not natural for me. I wasn't a bright academic person who had to go on for my PhD. That just wasn't me. But I did, and it enabled me to have opportunity to choose at that time between being a church appointee and being a faculty member at Graceland. And it was not an easy decision. And I assure you, in the years following, I cried often because I couldn't be both a church appointee and a faculty member at Graceland. Because I loved this church, this community of saints. I loved them dearly. And I loved the Graceland role that they played with persons in the community of Christ, as well as others who came, because we were certainly non-sectarian. Evolution in thought is really more difficult to talk about. As I say, even before going to Graceland, I began to have questions that especially had to do with what's literal, what's historical, and what might not be. And in the field of religion, those are significant questions. Why? Because the vast majority of Christians tend to be more literalistic about their most important beliefs, their worldview about religion, about God, about Christ, that kind of thing. I was raised, like probably most of you, with a God who was a father, who, if I prayed enough or I was good enough, might help me in time of particular need. And at times I would pray for hours, almost hours, it seemed, about certain things in my life. And I wanted God, my God, to come down and change things, help me do what I couldn't do. I was raised with the notion, I was part of the church for every Easter, and for every Christmas celebration. And I was raised with persons who participated in those celebrations, who believed in all of that, the beginning and the end, believed in all of that quite literally. I began to have doubts. Not about the significance of those celebrations and what ideas could inform me about the importance of life and about my commitments in life, but were questions that I could not let go with respect to religious belief system. And for many years, for decades, we have not been inclusive. And so if you, smoked, drank, came out of the closet, you were not accepted. You were not loved. And it was equally true, I can tell you, about belief systems. If you believed or didn't believe certain things, you were not accepted by some. I was a guest minister at a reunion in Michigan one time. Anita will remember this. I was teaching a course in theology, theological exploration, and Morris Draper was the other guest minister, and we shared sermons and classes together. And the reaction of some to the exploration of religion and to an acceptance of the uncertainties that there might be was bringing some reaction. I was getting a number of people coming up and saying, "Oh, Howard, thank you for saying what you said. I think I can stay in the church now." Because I've had some of the same questions. But you're saying it's okay. But the persons who reacted, Benita said, "I was afraid that you'd walk by a tree and someone would come out and get you with a knife."
No, it was a cross.
A what?
It was a cross that I thought they might hang.
Hang you on the
Oh,
cross.
hang me on the cross. But one of the most important aspects of my faith journey has been not to destroy other person's faith and their journey, but to be honest about my own. And if sharing that journey honestly could be helpful, that's what I wanted to do. So all the fundamental questions were raised for me about God, not all, but so many questions about God, about Jesus Christ, about the church. Early on, those questions were there. And so, in a nutshell, I moved from the notion of a God who lives outside of my world, who popped in and out of the world to do miracles or to make changes or to give me assistance that there's no way I could do on my own. I moved from that kind of a God, which, as you know, is wonderful and helpful as we grow up as children. I moved from that, and it was not all, it was so difficult to not a God apart from the world that operates. But if there is God, that God is finally the ground of our being, not a being popping in and out. Now, the ground of our being is almost a poetic expression, certainly a philosophical expression. But just in your own mind, think of the difference between a person appearing in front of you who's going to go back to heaven, but at least you have that nice experience for a little bit. A person who's there versus standing on the ground of what is ultimate about our lives. So I've spent my life then, my whole life, addressing and worrying about and concerned about ultimacy. What is divine? What is sacred in our world? And again, in a nutshell, what I've discovered, just for me, is that what is sacred, what is divine, is not some different dimension that God brings to the world, but is a part of the whole world and our whole lives. And we can address that, and we can participate in that ultimate reality or not. My view is that if we participate in that ground of our being fully, our lives can be transformed. Jesus Christ. It's hard. It's terribly hard. But Jesus Christ, for me, is not literally a supernatural being who came down from heaven, where his Father was, to be with us, to do a certain role, so that somehow we would be saved. That story doesn't speak to me anymore. And it's difficult. But that doesn't mean I don't respond to the significance of Jesus, called later the Christ, because you had theological interpretation of this Jesus, this crazy guy on the Sea of Galilee who was doing all kinds of things that was turning the world upside down for the people around him. So Jesus had to come to be for me something other than a divine being come out of heaven and ascending back to be with his Father. That creates a tremendous loss, doesn't it? Because we have no proof for life after death. Because for me, Jesus didn't resurrect out of the earth. Stone was not pushed back by the angels. I'm not saying that's not an important story, but I'm not disavowing the reality of person's religious experience. But for me, the interpretation of that experience, we can disagree about significantly. So Scripture, for me, doesn't provide some absolute word on anything except if I take seriously the contribution of that wisdom to our knowledge and to our hearts. And so Scripture, for me, cannot be used in a literal sense most of the time. It is an expression of the truth that can't be put into words. Creation, good example. How do you talk about creation? Scientists have a difficult time talking about evolution, don't they? And all of our words about what's important to us, most important to us, all of our words and our ideas fall short. And that's why myths are created, and legends, and poetry, and along with history, is a way of introducing us to what's important about life. Well, that, in a nutshell, that's it. I would be happy to. I had, and maybe this is a summary. I'm not trying to tout my own writings, but it's an example in a paragraph or so of what I'm talking about. And if you don't mind, I'll take a moment. I'm serious. We're not talking about any length. We're talking about paragraph or two. On some things that I've written in the past. Sometimes our scriptures are referred to or used as if they were a single piece of literature, where each and every passage is regarded as of equal truth, worth, and relevance. If you are old enough, you will remember the humorous recitation of the preacher. It's in the book. If it's in the book, that's proof enough for me. Usually, however, scripture is actually a collection of books or texts written over a span of time and different cultural, social, and historical environments, and is motivated and shaped by a wide array of needs and concerns and life situations. And the form of such expression forms are numerous: myths, legends, allegories, poems, proverbs, laws, dietary laws, ritual instructions, prophecies, songs, prayers, sermons, epistles, gospels, apocalypses, and many more. Concerning Scripture as revelatory, one approach sees Scripture as God-given, initiated by divinity, sacred as it stands, a manifestation of the holy by the holy. What is thought to be manifest is rather explicit propositions about reality and exactly how we are to live and behave. I'm gonna let that one go.
Howard, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
You apply great logic to religion. You also stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before you, because you've read their stuff, been tested on their stuff, understand their stuff. You add
Understand maybe.
well, you put those two things together. Is that your total religion, or is there something that stands outside that is hard to talk about in terms of words, etc.?
There's nothing that stands outside for me. That is, we cannot talk about God as reality outside. We can talk about or affirm, choose to affirm the reality of God as a part of our life, or as a part of life. And so, an example would be a priesthood call is not, it's either God calling or not. It's if God is involved, whatever that might mean for a person, then it's always God and a human being who participates in that experience. I don't know if that relates to what you were talking about. If it's something apart from us, I mean, we have to use us to talk about what is even, we think, apart from us.
My father was not a theologian, but his father was more of a theologian, but really old school.
Yes.
And when I used to ask him really hard questions,
Yeah.
he'd finally get to the point and say, well, that's just the mystery of God.
Well, that's good, that's good.
Very
then
unsatisfying.
Let me then share with you that one of the texts that I used was mystery without magic.
And I accept that, that's good, but what percentage of that is religion?
Oh, how do you talk about percent? If religion, in a sense, has to do with the commitments and concerns that are ultimate meaning and significance to us, how do you talk about percentage?
Well, but you would say a great part of your religious thought is based on logic and input from others, right?
Well, that's true about everything in my life. And I think,
Granted, but the religious,
let me put it a different way, or let me try to. Some persons have said, well, if you only had religious experiences in your life, then you'd know what I know. And I'd say, don't put me down. I started out with the kinds of religious experiences you're talking about. And I really did think it was something outside and making now this moment divine and special. But now my religious experience is much more profound, much more difficult, much more inclusive, much broader than anything I could have experienced as a younger person. So religious experience is not discarded from my life, but is not the kind of thing you're talking about or persons talk about when they say, did you have a religious experience?
So maybe a deeper understanding over the years, you've gained a deeper understanding of life and of who you are and who God is in relationship.
Well, I'd like to say that, but I can't claim that. I would like to believe that that's so, but I don't pretend. Let me tell you, and this will just take a moment. One of the things I know about myself and believe in myself is humility. Now, when I professed out at Graceland, and when I preached it in church in those good old days, it sounded like I was saying, this is the way it is. But it was just a humble attempt to deal with what I thought was important. And when I went to Iowa, honest to goodness, talk about humility. There were about 100 of us in the class I was in. And I was pretty sure I was 99 or 100 in terms of rank, in terms of ability, in terms of knowledge, in terms of intellect. I was intellectually humbled at Iowa. And I remember having a professor, we had to do 15 hours beyond religious studies in another discipline. And I chose psychology and counseling. And one professor I had to take, he had a reputation in Iowa, philosopher. Gustav Bergman, one of the last logical positivists, who hated the religion department. And he taught philosophy and psychology of science. Oh my gosh, we had to read his little textbook with all of the little symbols that supposedly we were to understand. And he must have smoked cigars. He had nicotine all over his teeth. And then he'd hunch over and he'd come around and he'd talk to you and kind of say, did you understand? And of course we were so scared to death. And he did that the whole semester. And finally, about halfway through, and he would go like a preacher does, he'd stand by the door and say, did you understand? as everybody walked out. And of course, we always said, I understand. Halfway through, I was dumb enough to say, you know, sir, about halfway through your explanation of that, I just didn't follow it all together. And he said, in front of everybody, that's what's wrong with you theologians! You don't know nothing!
Our time's up, but I want to take just one, if you would. What is your perspective on where the church is now compared to what you talked about?
Oh my, oh my. I don't know of any other, I'm not aware of any other religious organization or tradition or community that has grown more in, I personally think, healthy ways than the Community of Christ. That was my mission when I went to World Headquarters. Already, I knew where the church should go. We were not ecumenical, and I knew it needed to go there. We were not inclusive, and I knew it needed to go. We didn't have women seriously involved, and I knew it ought to go towards ministry. And I could go on and on. And so it used to be that I thought I was saving the church by what I was trying to do. Now I have nothing to offer. The church has moved in directions that, for me, are much more healthy and life-affirming directions. So I'm thrilled and amazed by the change that has occurred in the last 50, 60 or so years.
I consider you a pioneer.